mugshot? Hey guys, welcome back to Bridgewater Student Ministries. My name is David, and I am super glad you decided to join us here today. This fall, we are going to be going through a teaching series called Starting Point. And in this series, we want to make sure that we give everyone an opportunity for a fresh start in their faith journey. Because really where you start is going to determine where you end up. Last week, we talked about our problem that the Bible calls sin. Sometimes we like to think that we are just mistakers, but our problem is actually deeper than just mistakes. Our problem is that we are all sinners, and it leaves our world in a great big mess. And today we're going to talk about how God responds to us in that mess. What does God do with the mess in the world, and ultimately, what does God do with my mess? When it comes to messes, most of us have been told that you clean up what you mess up. Right? Like when you make a mess at home, I hope that your parents tell you to clean it up. To be a contributing member of society, it's important to clean up after ourselves instead of just like expecting somebody else to do it. I can remember one time when I was a kid that I made a really big mess. When I was younger, I was pretty short. Clearly a lot has changed in that category. So I often had to climb up things to get to stuff on the top shelf. We had this dresser that had two parts. The bottom was your normal dresser, maybe 3 foot tall and, had 3 or 4 drawers in it. And the top was more like a wardrobe meets a bookshelf. It was probably another 3 or 4 foot tall, and it had all kinds of cubbies and drawers and stuff like that in it. Now, when you're short like I was as a kid, you get used to climbing stuff to reach the top shelf. And so one day I wanted something from the top shelf of this dresser. I don't remember what it was, but I wanted it, and so I was climbing up this dresser when the whole top half of the thing comes crashing down on top of me. If it wasn't for the bunk bed that was behind me nearby that it caught that dresser, I probably would have been crushed underneath it and probably seriously injured. Instead, the top half of the dresser caught at an angle like this, and all the stuff just kind of spills out everywhere. All kinds of stuff, just a big mess. It was a great big mess, and here I am right in the middle of it. My mom hears this commotion and she walks in to find me in the middle of this great big mess I caused. And she points her finger at me and she says, "How dare you? How could you be so stupid? Look at this mess. You better clean it up right now." And she walks away. Now, you don't know my mom, but you don't need to know her to know that of course she didn't do that. Of course she didn't see her son sitting there hurt and in a mess and just leave him there. Of course my mom asked if I was okay. Of course she helped me clean up that mess. You don't even need to know her to know that that's how she would respond in that moment. And yet, many of us think that that is how God would respond to us in our mess. We think that God sees us in our sin and says, "Look at what you did, you big idiot. You better figure it out." Because you have to clean up what you mess up. Which means that you think that my mom has more compassion than God does. Which means that you think my mom is more God-like than God is. And while my mom is one of the godliest women that I know, she is not more God-like than God. And so maybe, just maybe, there's something about our perception of God that's a little bit off. Maybe we are missing something and we need a fresh starting point. Because when we look at the story of the Bible, we find again and again that God's response isn't, "Good luck cleaning up that mess, you big idiot." Instead, we find a God who wades into our mess. There's a man in the Old Testament whose story really illustrates for us God's response to our mess. His name is Abram, or Abraham, as we more commonly call him. God actually changes his name in the course of this story. His story is told to us in Genesis, the first book of the Bible. And God's first interaction with Abraham is recorded in chapter 12. But before we get there, we need to know that at this point in the story, God had created the world and all of mankind, and man had rebelled against God. People had made really a huge mess of the world, and God looked down on that mess and decided he was going to wade into it by choosing one man, Abraham, and blessing the world through him. So here's what God says to Abram in Genesis chapter 12. The Lord had said to Abram, "Leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you." In the middle of the mess that mankind had made of the world, God chose this man and made some amazing promises to him. And these promises weren't really just about Abraham. They were really about the whole world, because God was looking to solve the problem that people had gotten themselves entangled in. So here's our big truth for today that we find illustrated in this story. Instead of walking away, God waded into our mess. Instead of saying way back in Genesis, "Well, they've made a mess, let's hope they clean it up, I'll be over here if you need me." Instead of doing that, God chose to wade into the mess to save us and to rescue us. Just like my mom waded into my mess to make sure that I was okay and to help me, God decided to step into the mess we had made by creating a special relationship with Abraham, whose descendants become the people of Israel. God's promise to Abram becomes really the foundation for the special relationship with the people of Israel. And ultimately, it is out of Israel that Jesus comes and makes a way for all people to be saved from their mess. And so all the way back in Genesis, God is making a way for people to be made right with him. Instead of just walking away as we deserve, God wades into our mess. God had said that he would make Abram into a great nation, but at the time he said that, Abram had no children. Now some time passes, actually about 25 years, and now Abram and his wife are well beyond childbearing years. And so Abram is wondering, is anything going to happen here? Let's read the next part of the story, Genesis chapter 15. Sometime later, the Lord spoke to Abram in a vision and said to him, "Do not be afraid, Abram, for I will protect you, and your reward will be great." But Abram replied, "O sovereign Lord, what good are all your blessings when I don't even have a son? Since you've given me no children, Eliezer of Damascus, a servant in my household, will inherit all my wealth. You have given me no descendants of my own, so one of my servants will be my heir." Then the Lord said to him, "No, your servant will not be your heir, for you will have a son of your own who will be your heir." Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, "Look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have." And so God says, even though you are old and you have no son, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars. That's quite a promise given his present circumstances. He's older and he's unable to have kids. But look at how Abraham responds in that moment. Verse 6. "And Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith." Abram believed God, and God said that he was righteous because of his faith. Like, wait a minute, that's it? That's all it takes to be righteous? What about all the bad stuff that he had done? What about the mess that he had made? Like, if you read the rest of the story, you'll find that this is certainly a flawed individual. And yet, all he has to do is believe, and God says that he is righteous. And in this, we see the starting point for a restored relationship with God. All that it takes is trust. All that it takes is that we believe and trust in what God says, just like Abraham did. And so here's what we need to understand. Trusting God is what results in a right relationship with God. In order to get our mess cleaned up, we don't have to just do it on our own. In fact, we never could. God waded into our mess in the person of Jesus, and now all we have to do is trust in him. We have to trust in his death, his burial, and his resurrection, like we talked about in week 1. And so the way to a right relationship with God has really always been trusting God. It was how Abraham was counted as righteous, and it's how we can be counted as righteous. you've never trusted in God for salvation, we would love to talk with you about that. I encourage you to grab a leader and a friend before you leave tonight and have a conversation. In your groups today, I would encourage you to talk about any misconceptions you might have of how God responds to us in our mess, and about if you have ever trusted in God like Abraham did. We'll see you next week.